Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. My name is Ian Urquhart. I'm the Executive Director of Alberta Wilderness Association. I'm going to be the moderator of tonight's town hall. And I'm very pleased to welcome you to the 5th town hall AWA has hosted about coal mining in Alberta. Tonight, we will hear from 4 people who have been involved extensively with coal over the past 18 months or so. In my view, they have all played a vital role in informing Albertans about the realities of coal mining and coal policy, and what allowing new metallurgical coal mines in the Rockies and headwaters of the Rockies will do to the living legacies embodied in the Eastern Slopes. What we've asked them to do this evening is to reflect on, from their respective vantage points, the events that have taken place over this summer and where they think we are headed or where we should be headed come this fall. June was a remarkable month, distinguished in my mind by three key decisions. The first, arguably most momentous decision, was the Alberta Energy Regulator's rejection of the Grassy Mountain Coal Project. That rejection came through the report of the Joint Federal Provincial Review Panel on that project that was established to evaluate Grassy Mountain. The second was the announcement by Federal Environment and Climate Change Minister Jonathan Wilkinson that all new metallurgical coal projects and expansions would be subject to federal impact assessments. And the third announcement in June, to my mind, was the announcement from Minister Wilkinson that the Tent Mountain project would be designated for a federal assessment under the Federal Impact Assessment Act. July, the empire struck back, or trying to strike back, I suppose, in July when Banga mining, as well as the Piikani and the Stoney Nakoda First Nations, turned to the courts to try to revive Grassy Mountain. They have all asked for permission from the Alberta Court of Appeal permission to appeal the Grassy Mountain decision that the Alberta Energy Regulator reached in June. Those applications will be heard this December, early December of this year. In August, we saw the federal government do something that I don't believe it was required to do, and that was at its own rejection of the Grassy Mountain project. That provoked Banga Mining to apply to the federal courts for judicial review of the ministers and the federal cabinet's decision to do just that. While all this was going on, we had Dr. Ron Wallace and the Coal Policy Committee he chairs carry out the version of public consultation that the provincial government was prepared to allow on this particular issue. So it was a very busy time when it came to coal in Alberta. The people we've invited to speak about coal this evening are Nigel Banks, Bruce Masterman, Laura Myers, and Adam North Pagan. Nigel is a professor emeritus of law at the University of Calgary. I, for one, over the years have learned a great deal from Nigel's analyses of natural resource issues and natural resources law in Canada. And I'm certainly happy to add his thoughts and perspectives about coal to that list. We're also joined this evening by Bruce Masterman. With respect to coal, many of you will recognize that Bruce, as a town councillor for High River, has helped to give the municipal level of government in Alberta important profile when it comes to questioning the witness, Bruce, initially, a lifetime ago now. What fewer may know is that he's just an outstanding outdoors writer. Our third speaker this evening is Laura Myers. Laura, to my mind, is part of the brain trust that has given Albertans the Protect Alberta's Rockies and Headwaters Facebook group. I don't know how Laura and the others behind that Facebook group regard their success in mobilizing and providing a forum for Albertans to speak out about the coal issue. But for my money, I think their impact has been just absolutely staggering, with well over 37,000 members of that group today. Last but by no means least is Adam North Pagan. I met Adam through his position as the chair of the Mountain Child Valley Society. His involvement with this society is Adam's latest in a long list of positions through which he's pursued better lives for the Piikani and other First Nations. Previously, Adam was a councillor, for example, of the Piikani First Nation. Adam himself was a victim of the so-called 60s scoop, where child welfare agencies took First Nations children from their homes and put them in foster homes. Today, speaking to that issue, he serves as the president of the 60s Scoop Indigenous Society of Alberta, a nonprofit that strives to develop what they call true reconciliation. In the spirit of reconciliation tonight, AWA is pleased to offer this land acknowledgement to honor and acknowledge Mohkinstsis and the traditional Treaty 7 territory and oral practices of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, as well as the Stoney Nakoda and Tsuut'ina nations. We acknowledge as well that the territory that AWA's offices are located on is home to the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. Finally, AWA looks forward to the day when government representatives, especially those of Canada's federal and provincial governments, include in land acknowledgement statements such as this one, a long list of the substantive measures they have taken to realize reconciliation with Canada's First Nations. The format for this evening is pretty straightforward. Each of our speakers will offer us their views for approximately 15 minutes. The order of the speakers is Nigel will lead us off, then Bruce, Laura, and Adam will take us home at the end of the evening. Once our speakers have delivered their remarks, we'll open things up for approximately 30 minutes of questions. The question and answer part of the evening will work this way. Please pose any questions you have in our chat section. I, as the moderator, will take those questions, synthesize them where possible or necessary, and then put them to the panelists on your behalf. So I think that's it. I think that's it from my end of things for this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to our panelists for taking the time to be with us this evening. And I think we're ready to go. And with that, I'll turn the floor over to our first speaker, Professor Nigel Banks. Thank you.
So, good evening, everyone. Thanks, Ian, for the invitation to join this event this evening. And thanks also to the AWA for hosting this and previous town hall discussions. And thanks especially for that land acknowledgement, Ian. So as Ian said, a lot has happened on what I think of as the coal file since AWA's last session on June the 8th. And I'm going to speak to three developments that I've focused on from a legal angle. And Ian, I think, has actually mentioned just about all of them. But the first is, of course, the status of the Grassy Mountain Metallurgical Coal Project. Second, I'll talk a bit about the federal policy statement on thermal coal that Ian mentioned, and then a follow-up statement on June the 18th, which has implications for metallurgical coal projects as well. And I'll leave to others to cover other developments that they choose to focus on. So you'll recall that the Grassy Mountain project was under review last year by a joint review panel, the JRP as it's called. And the JRP was fulfilling responsibilities as both the Alberta energy regulator and in particular a set of responsibilities under the Coal Conservation Act for the review of the proposed project, and as a federal assessment panel under the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act of 2012, so SEA 2012 as it's called, which is the predecessor to the current Impact Assessment Act recently passed by the Liberal government. And that old act was applying, and it still is applying, because when this project started review, that was the relevant legislation. And as Ian mentioned, the panel handed down it's, I think we would say, a pretty hard-hitting report and decision on June the 17th. And to put it briefly, the panel, sitting as the Alberta energy regulator under the Coal Conservation Act, gets to make final decisions about projects. In other words, the JRP, sitting as the AER, is not simply making recommendations to the provincial cabinet, it is deciding once and for all about the viability of the project. And the panel unequivocally ruled that the project was not in the public interest and rejected it. And it rejected it principally on the grounds of selenium contamination and the untested selenium management proposal that Benga was relying on. There are other grounds as well, including species at risk issues, particularly West Slope cutthroat trout. And the panel also criticized Benga in, I think, an unusually forthright way for basing its assessment on unrealistic assumptions, both unrealistic assumptions about the technology it was applying for selenium management, but also unrealistic assumptions on the economic side of things, which made the project look more favorable than the panel found was likely. And a lot of reliance on what's referred to as adaptive management, which you can think of as booting things down the road. If we haven't got an answer now, trust us, we'll find an answer as the project evolves. So that was the JRP panel report on the provincial side of things, absolute and final rejection as not being in the public interest under the Coal Conservation Act. On the federal side of things, the panel has more of what you might think of as an inquiry function rather than a decision-making function. Its job is principally to assess the significance of the adverse environmental effects of the project, and then leave it to the minister and the cabinet to assess what to do in light of that assessment of significant environmental impact. And of course, following what the panel has said in relation to its provincial responsibilities, it did indeed conclude that this project would have significant environmental impacts. And in this case, the federal cabinet in August, and Ian has mentioned this as well, the cabinet considered that the project impacts could not be justified. Now, that should have been the end of it. But of course, Benga, Riverdale Resources, Australian-backed company, has taken the issues to court, both on the provincial side of the decision-making and on the federal side of the decision-making. So on the provincial side of the decision-making, the process is actually an application by Benga for leave to appeal to the Alberta Court of Appeal on a point of law or jurisdiction. And on the federal side of things, what's being attacked is not the panel report, but the decisions made by the minister and cabinet to and their conclusion that the project should not be allowed to go ahead. And I've just lost my screen here, so I'm hoping I can get it back. Maybe the moderator could tell me if I can still be heard.
Yep, we can
Or have
still
you
hear you.
lost me entirely?
We can still hear you.
Maybe we should write in chat that we hear him. I'm thinking maybe he can't hear us. And he appears frozen.
It appears like Ian is frozen as well, yes?
Don't
Oh,
think
no,
so.
there he is. There you
Okay.
are.
I think, and so I think Benga Mining has scooped Nigel Banks and has taken him away from us at this particular point in time. Why don't we do the following? Why don't I presume Nigel's going to try to get back into the session. Bruce, why don't we turn things over to you? And then when we have Nigel back, maybe once Adam has finished at the end, we'll hear what Nigel thinks about the applications that Benga has made. So how does that sound? Is that all right with you, Bruce? If you pick up at this point?
Yeah, that's just fine.
Okay.
Yeah, and I just wanted to check with you, Ian. During Nigel's presentation, mine just went off, and I had to come back in. Did that happen to anybody else, or is that just me? I really hope it doesn't happen. So we'll just try
Okay.
that. I'll just proceed.
Okay. Thanks, Bruce.
Okay. So yeah, good evening, everybody, and thanks for joining us tonight. And thanks to Ian and to AWA for organizing this, and Ian for the generous introduction as well. This is our first time here, so I'm going to start by giving you a little bit of background about High River and our involvement in the coal issue, how that came about, and then talk a little bit about how we involved other municipalities and how I think we can sort of keep this alive during the municipal election while we're waiting for the coal committee to report. So just a little bit of background. High River is a little town of just under 14,000 people, located on the edge of the foothills. Everybody probably knows this, about a half hour south of Calgary. And we rely on the Highwood River with the headwaters in K Country, straight west of us, for our water supply and for agriculture, recreation, and wildlife, and obviously just our general lifestyles. We, unlike the rest of the panelists, High River was late to the party. The coal issue had been burning for some time before High River got involved in it. in January of this year. And Craig Snodgrass, our mayor and lifelong resident of High River, learned about it and started talking with ranchers and guides and outfitters, recreation groups in the foothills southwest of High River. And basically, the more he researched, the madder he got. I'd been involved a little bit before then because I'd been interviewed by local media about the coal plans, and I'd made some comments that caught the attention and raised the ire of a Crow's Nest municipality of Crow's Nest Pass town councillor, and we'd had a very respectful actually exchange where we just agreed to disagree on everything. But when Craig first brought the issue to our town council on January 11th, he asked us to approve a motion asking the Alberta government to reinstate the 1976 policy. Both of us spoke at length in council about the dangers of coal mining, what it would pose to water supplies, particularly along the eastern slopes, and including the Highwood, should coal mining come that far north. And kind of one of the proposals actually just touches on the south end of the Highwood drainage, so obviously selenium poisoning of the Highwood and other related side effects would be disastrous for our town, just as it would for all the municipalities downstream. So we had a very good discussion about that motion. We knew that we were kind of venturing into new territory because we hadn't really known of any municipalities that were getting involved in this issue. We weren't thrilled with the some of the comments that were being made by our local MLA, so we approved that motion by a 7-0 vote to ask the province to reinstate the policy, and with that vote we entered the fray, and just a little bit of background. The media one time asked Craig if all High River residents supported council being involved in this, and he responded that he could count on 2 fingers the number of residents who had questioned our decision to get involved in the issue. So it's very interesting, even though Craig and I kind of lead the discussion and the updates on council, all 7 members have voted for every motion that we've brought to, or that Craig has brought to the table. In May, he brought kind of our most controversial motion, and that was to approve of what we called the proposed Alberta coal restriction policy. And basically the policy calls for no more coal development or exploration on the slopes. There's a few other parts to it, but basically it was based on the rationale that the inherent value of the eastern slopes it only exists with the landscape remaining intact, and of course other rationale was obviously the water issue, and the economics, which basically we just stated no amount of jobs or money created by coal exploration or development can offset the negative effects to the environment or human and animal health. And again, it was a 7-0 vote, and we actually sent that policy to all 344 municipalities in Alberta, and we asked them to endorse it. I'd love to be able to report to you that every single one of them did. They didn't, but we got 25 municipalities that did endorse that policy, and they ranged from municipalities like the village of Longview with just over 300 people, to the city of Lethbridge, which is the largest populated municipality whose water supply in the Oldman River drainage would be impacted by coal mines. And the MD of Ranchland also signed it. And the MD of Ranchland, interesting, they have less than 100 people, but very, very big municipality geographically, and west of Nanton, and just a massive area going down to the Crow's Nest Pass. And it would stand to gain millions of dollars in tax revenue from the coal mines, and it also signed that our policy. And the the number of 25, some people might consider it's not a real significant number. We think it is. In addition to the 25 municipalities, our policy was also endorsed by 2 First Nations, Lubicon Lake and Smith's Landing in the Northwest Territories, of all places. It's wonderful to get their support as well. 7 different organizations and 5 businesses as well, including 1 coffee shop in the Crow's Nest Pass. Starting in January, I started documenting the actions of various municipalities that I heard about, and I don't think I heard about them all, but the various municipalities, I documented 35 of them, and several First Nations that had written letters or approved motions that they sent to the province, expressing some kind of concern about the coal issue, and they included a letter from Calgary Mayor Naheed Nenshi to Kenny, and he bluntly said, expanding and permitting additional coal mining, given its documented significant impacts on watersheds, does not align with the shared vision for Alberta or with Albertans' clear expectations about conservation. A really big one came from the county of Brazeau, which is right in the heart of Jason Nixon country. And they sent, in August, they sent Kenny a letter saying the council is opposed to increased coal mining because there are better, quote, there are better ways to increase economic development and diversity. So that means about 60 municipalities representing 3.2 million Albertans have either called for no future coal mining or have expressed some kind of interest or concern, I should say, about coal. Kind of disheartening were some of the reasons that we heard why some municipalities didn't want to sign our no coal policy. Some were afraid of retribution from the government of Alberta. One councillor actually was quoted in the paper saying, "You don't bite the hand that feeds you." Others expressed allegiance. We knew they had allegiance to the UCP government by a majority of council members. And others just didn't want to make a decision that went against what the municipality of Crow's Nest Pass wanted. Last month, Craig and I, Mayor Snodgrass, we presented to the coal committee. And after our formal presentation, the chair, Ron Wallace, asked our opinion on basically on the dilemma that they face. And he said most people and groups that have presented to the committee are against coal mining, but there's a smaller percentage that support it. And he said, he honestly asked us this. He said, "What would you do in our situation? How would you handle this dilemma?" And I said, there is no dilemma. The answer is simple: do what's right for Alberta. There's no point trying to balance your recommendation to reflect the numbers that you're getting. You won't make everyone happy, but you can do what's best for the future of this province. And that means no more coal mining on the Eastern Slope, period, full stop. Obviously, we'll see in the fall what impact our words had on the chair and on his committee. In the meantime, I think it's really important that we keep this issue in front of Albertans. We're certainly distracted by all kinds of other things right now, including COVID. But I think we've got a perfectly vehicle to keep it active in front of people. The federal election happens Monday, but we've still got the municipal election coming up on October 18th and the campaign leading up to it. So I think it's really important that we make sure that the candidates who want our votes are also people who care for the future of their communities through their water sources and other factors. As High River decided back in January, and as about 60 other municipalities have indicated in their actions, this is not just a federal or a provincial issue. It's also a municipal issue. Almost forefront, it's a municipal issue. Just about every municipality in Alberta would be touched by coal mining in some way, especially if they depend on their water from the North or South Saskatchewan rivers. Without a future supply of clean water and sufficient water, there's no future for these municipalities at all. So my recommendation is when these people come to your door, when these municipal candidates come to your door, or they speak at a forum, or they have an open house or a meet and greet, grill them on where they stand on future coal mining on the eastern slopes. And if they say they don't know, or that it's not a municipal issue, or that it's complicated, tell them bluntly, that's not good enough. If they say it's important to balance resource development with environmental concerns, tell them in no uncertain terms, that's not good enough. There's no environmental health with coal mining, period. If they don't care about their own municipality and its residents, and if they don't care about their neighboring municipalities and those people, then they don't deserve your vote. We really want to thank Albertans for keeping this issue in the forefront, for letting our politicians know where you stand, for presenting your views to the coal committee, for sending your letters, for writing letters to the editor, and many, many thanks to organizations like the AAWA and others for continuing to fight the good fight. And hopefully we'll get the result that not just that we want, but what we need. So so for the sake of Alberta. So thanks so much for listening to me.
Bruce, thank you. Yeah, no, thank you for those remarks and grilling the municipal candidates. I mean, just how powerful that message should be, and I hope people will take that to heart and do that in the weeks ahead. I'm going to throw a question out there now that I'd like the four of you to consider in the question and answer session, and it comes in part, Bruce, from what you were saying, and it's this: like you
We lost
I
you.
think when you're but yeah, I have a
We lost you
problem.
for a minute. You started again.
Okay, I'm sorry. I have an internet connection that's unstable, but a question I'd like you to address later on, the four of you, is what's the rationale for the politicians in this? Like what do you see as being, what's driving this? Because, I'm a recovering political scientist, and I view this as an issue that's just a total loser across all dimensions. So yeah, I'd like, when we get to the question and answers, if that's something I'd like you to help me understand, because I just don't get it. So Laura, can we turn things over to you then?
Yeah, unless you want to allow Nigel to finish. I can't see where he is here, but I would be okay if you wanted to finish up, just so that we don't lose his train of thought.
Sure. Okay. Let's do that. Nigel, if you're good with that, can we get back to you?
Sure.
Yes. Okay, perfect.
Train of thought long since lost, actually, Laura. And my apologies to everyone. For some reason, my screen went blank, and then when I tried to restart the computer, it wanted to do a complete reboot and update. So, anyway, I think where I was leaving us was the JRP panel, and then applications in both federal court and the Alberta Court of Appeal for judicial review or appeal of the decision. And I'd like to park that there and say that in addition to Benga's application, as Ian mentioned at the outset, we also have parallel applications from Stoney Nakoda First Nation and the Peigan First Nation. So there's some outstanding uncertainty there. We can come back in the Q&A to talk about the merits of those applications. But I wanted to finish my remarks by talking about two other federal decisions that were made. And the first was the thermal coal policy statement, and the second was a follow-up statement relating to metallurgical coal mines. So shortly before the JRP decision, in fact, on June 13th, the federal government, in conjunction with a G7 summit that was going on in the UK, issued a thermal policy coal statement, a thermal coal policy statement. And that's actually pretty unusual for governments to do this. But basically, the policy states, and this puts this in a more international context, if we're serious about net zero carbon emissions by 2050, then coal simply has to go. And that commitment, which the federal government had articulated earlier in the year, must inform all federal decision-making, and in particular decision-making under the Federal Impact Assessment Act. And that will inevitably require new thermal coal projects to be designated, which means they can be brought into the federal system, and it will also affect any ultimate federal decision-making with respect to a project that goes through a review. So that was in relation to thermal coal. Didn't actually say anything about metallurgical coal, but then not that long after, on June the 18th, in response to Heather McPherson's request for a regional impact assessment. So this, again, under the Impact Assessment Act, would have seen the feds do a regional assessment. And Minister Wilkinson said, no, I'm not going to do a regional assessment, but what I'm going to say is that any future metallurgical coal mines are also going to be subject to federal scrutiny. So where's the really important point of all of this going forward? Well, we've got a federal election on Monday, and many of us have already voted, I think, in advance polls. But I think one question to ask is, what are the relative policy statements from those asking for our votes in relation to federal involvement in important coal and more generally carbon issues? One thing we've seen from this last Liberal administration is a willingness to get involved, to not simply leave decision-making in relation to coal projects to the provinces, but to engage on the issues, to put this in a broader global climate change context, and to use their powers under the Impact Assessment Act to bring those issues to the fore. And so that's where I'll leave it. I think we have less certainty from other federal parties. I think the NDs have indicated they would take a similar approach, but I think we've heard less in terms of specific commitments from other parties. So look forward to the Q&A. Apologies again for the interruption. And perhaps just over to you, Laura.
Thanks. Thank you, Nigel. Laura, take it away.
Okay, well, the first thing I'm going to say is thank you for inviting me. I'm feeling extremely out of my depth because, yeah, I'm just a lowly Facebook page administrator, not so much the intellectual power of the rest of the troops here. So that's a little bit intimidating to me, but I spend my days talking my head off, so I think I'll be okay. So that's the first thing, is to thank you for inviting me here, and thank everybody who's been participating on the Facebook page. It started as prompting after Levi, and I forget his last name, posted the video way back last December about lands he could no longer hike on because they had been shut down by the coal companies who were doing their exploration. And a friend of mine started the page because he was just mad one Thursday evening. I think it was the 18th of December. In a month, we had almost 40,000 members. It was a little bit astonishing how quickly it grew. And so my brother and this friend of ours, the three of us were working on it. So we've got a few more people helping out now, but it just became this sort of, it became a mission. At that point, there was no group or organization that had really galvanized into a single campaign to stop this sort of thing. And we felt like we were, our responsibility, given that we'd had so many members so fast, was to actually start a campaign and figure out how to put the roadblocks in place. We happily found out we didn't have to do that. There were other groups that were prepared to sort of take on that. And so our role became one of communicating and sharing information, which is exactly what a Facebook page should do. So the things that have happened or that are interesting about it, the demographics of the page show us that it's mostly women, and mostly women over 40 who are engaged in this fight. It's not surprising we don't have a lot of young people on the page, because young people don't use Facebook. They're Instagram and TikTokers now. And so if they're on Facebook at all, it's because they've had to out of necessity for some job or some project or whatever. They don't engage with Facebook the way that they once did. So that is a bit of a challenge to try and get the young people involved. I've since become involved with a couple of groups who are working with some younger people to try and encourage their they're not engaged politically. They're not engaged the way that we want them to be with what's going on around them. But I can't really fault them for that, because I wasn't either. I was asleep at the wheel as well until, this political issue sort of fell into my lap. And now I am woke, as they say. I am up and on it, and I am not going to let it, I'm not going to let it die. It's exhausting. And like everyone, I'm overwhelmed by a ton of other things as well as this stuff, but it's too important a fight for us to let it go. So I'll tell you a few things that I've learned about what's happened on the page. The things in the Crow's Nest Pass are not good for people who oppose the coal mines. I get private messages all the time from people who are afraid to speak up because they're worried about whether or not their business is going to get vandalized, whether or not their tires are going to get slashed, or someone's going to come break their windows, which sounds horrible to me. I don't know how people would live in an area like that with that kind of, horrible stuff going on around them. The purpose of the site was to help communicate the correct messages, the scientific messages. And I've been very fortunate to have connections with all sorts of geologists and hydrologists and coal mining specialists who are no longer working in coal mines, and all sorts of people who have offered up their information through groups like AWA and the AEN and Y2Y. Like all sorts of these people now are involved in the page, and we're getting, they're communicating the actual factual scientific information. Unfortunately, people who don't want to hear scientific information aren't going to care about whether or not it comes from a legitimate source. And so you can only do what you can do. You can lead them horse to water, so to speak. I myself went down to the Crow's Nest Pass for the first time in my sad, sad life. I went this summer because I wanted to see what it was all about. And my nephew met me there, and we did some hiking and driving up to these places where the roads are blocked off by the various coal companies. And we went over a couple fences, and we took a look at some things that are going on up there. I have it on good authority that some exploration has stopped. And I know that for a fact because I have a friend who runs a trucking company, and his trucking company hauled the equipment out of there. He won't tell me which one, he won't tell me who, but I do know that the equipment they took down there is no longer there. So that is good news. What else do I want to say? I want to talk about how the voices from the past that are not on the side of the coal mining, they're being stifled by, I think, a very small minority of people who want these mines. And I think that, one of the things that's become clear to me in the last few days is that the MD of Ranchland is the one that would benefit financially from this whole thing, because the mines are not in the Crow's Nest Pass, they're in Ranchland. And so, I mean, yes, they would have jobs, but it's not like the tax base would significantly increase, because those people, the tax base for the companies would be going to a different community altogether. So it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. But one of the other things I learned when I was down there was that this whole coal mining past that these people are hanging on to, it's horrible and tragic. There is nothing uplifting or positive about it. Everything that's down there that's hanging onto the coal mining, it's so sad. And I think about, this is the argument that I've said to a few people is, name the town, name the thriving metropolis city that has come from the ashes of a coal mine to become this place where millionaires, drive their Porsches through the streets. And you can't do it because it doesn't exist. Coal mining towns do not prosper. Rich people elsewhere prosper. And so the fact that they're hanging on to these jobs, and I don't even believe there could be that many jobs, but they're hanging on to these jobs for so little return, and the devastation that could happen environmentally, it's astonishing to me. And those are the kinds of things that people are talking about on the Facebook page. When we get to the political stuff, it's really hard. Early on, we decided that we needed to stay nonpartisan because we need every voice on this. Doesn't matter whether you're a liberal or a conservative or an NDP or whatever. Here, I actually live in High River, and I'm very proud to say that Craig Snodgrass is my mayor and Bruce Masterman is one of my councillors. But the people in this town, they're very conservative, and not one person I have spoken to thinks the coal mining is a good idea. And so it's not a political issue, even though we can't keep politics out of it because of the way that it's been dealt with by this provincial government. So it's really tough to keep the conversation productive and focused because people are angry about so many things. And if there's something to be angry about, it's Facebook. And so that's where people are going to put their ire. Right now, it's a bit challenging to keep people focused because we're in a holding pattern. We're waiting for the federal election. We're waiting for legal cases to go through. We're waiting for the coal committee. We're waiting for this decision and that decision. And so people need something to do. And this almost 40,000 people, it's kind of like holding back an army. They are ready for action, but they don't really know. They're waiting for us to give them guidance about what they can do. And so we work for calls to action. And that's the last thing I'd like to mention. There is a petition that is being circulated is in support of what is being called the Eastern Slopes Protection Act, which is a private member's bill that Rachel Notley is going to put forward when the legislature sits again. She has the first private member's bill, so it'll get on the order paper for sure. Probably it will get voted down, but I think if it accompanies boxes and boxes of petitions, of signatures of Albertans who really believe that this is a bad idea for our future and for our health and our wellness and for our environment, that maybe it'll send a message. This government is very good at not listening. I personally don't think they ever took those earplugs out. So we have to do whatever we can, and we have to stay fighting at it. I have forwarded the petition to Sean here with the AWA, and he will post it on your website. You can also find it on the Facebook page under Alberta AB petition. The deadline is fairly short. We need to get all these forms with the signatures to Edmonton, I think by the 18th of October, but I'll check on that. Either way, it's really important that we try to stay engaged and we keep our friends and neighbors engaged, that we communicate accurate and factual information, and that we try and keep our emotion out of it as much as possible, even though that's not an easy thing to do. Because one thing I learned very quickly with the Facebook page is that if you get too emotional about it, or if you can't stay objective about what you're saying, then you're just labeled as a crazy environmentalist and nobody's going to listen to you. So you've got to keep it as focused as you possibly can on the facts. And And that's where things are with that. And I'm happy to take questions if and when that happens later on. So that's all I have to say about all of that.
Laura, thank you. Thanks very much. And it's really interesting. I mean, the demographics of the Facebook thing is like really is something that's really intriguing. And I think one question that comes out of this is, and you raised it, is the one of, well, if we're looking to get other demographics, particularly youth, for example, involved, how do we do that? You know, what do we do in order to make that happen?
Yeah, it's
So,
definitely tough. It's definitely tough.
Yeah. Adam, can we turn things over to you, and you can take us home before the Q&A session?
Okay, thank you, Ian, and I very much appreciate your invite when you reached out to me a couple of months ago or a month ago, Ian, so thank you. And I also want to acknowledge, I mean, I appreciate the land acknowledgement at the beginning. As an Indigenous man who's been working hard on the whole coal file and numerous other things, you know, within our community, that just know that it was very much appreciated, the land acknowledgement, you know, so thank you. But anyways, my name is Adam North Pagan, and I'm from the Peigan First Nation in the southwest corner of Alberta, and I'm the chairman for the Peigan First Nation Mountain Child Valley Society. And you know what? I've been hearing from some of the other presenters about these appeals that have been happening, you know, that Benga has filed an appeal. The Stoney Nakoda leadership has filed an appeal, and the Peigan First Nation Chief and Council have filed an appeal. So I'm going to shed some light on this whole matter and kind of give you all a little bit of inside information, okay, that I think is very, very important for all of you on the Indigenous front. But anyways, when Ian kind of talked to me about coming in and sharing a little bit about you know, what we have been doing, you know, from the First Nations perspective, there was kind of a theme, end of summer, because it is the end of summer. We're on the eve of fall, and what has been going on through the summer. So I'm sure that some of you are probably aware towards the end of June, the Mountain Child Valley Society, we organized a rally that was from Crow's Nest Lake. And that rally was supposed to come up, you know, along Highway 3 going east into Peigan First Nation. And the plan is that when we got to the Peigan First Nation, we were all going to go assemble down in the coulee, down in the valley, along the Old Man Water within Peigan Nation, and hold a peaceful demonstration, not a protest, but a peaceful demonstration. But when that rally arrived, you know, along Highway 3 and came into the Peigan First Nation, you know, up the hill, we were advised that our leadership had imposed a media ban, as well as a ban on all non-band members coming into the community on that particular date. And they were using the pandemic as the scapegoat. You know, that's how we saw it, right? And it's no secret that you know, the Peigan First Nation leadership is really, really adamantly pushing for the Grassy Mountain right from the get-go. And I guess maybe what had happened is there was a lot of Peigan grassroots members that were, you know, had a lot of concerns about the desecration of you know, our ancestral lands. And where Grassy Mountain is, that is within Peigan First Nation ancestral lands. We are the nearest Indigenous community within Grassy Mountain, and we feel that we have, you know, we needed to do what we needed to do to protect Mother Earth and, you know, our historical hunting and gathering and our ceremonial, you know, places where we used to do that. And so we formed a page on social media, and through ceremony with our elders, we were gifted the name Mountain Child Valley Society. And we have probably close to 400 plus members on our page. And that to me is, is a big shout out coming from the grassroots people that, we're adamantly opposed to any kind of coal mining exploration on the eastern slopes of the Rocky Mountains. So we in the Peigan First Nation, we have had an additional hurdle to overcome, and let alone fighting the the Jason Kenney government and the federal impact review and everybody else. But we have also had a little bit of more of a fight with our own leadership. And, we've been doing everything we can in our power to let our leadership know that, the grassroots nation members do not support this. There is no meaningful consultation with grassroots nation members. When the decision was made to move forward with Grassy Mountain, that was made unilaterally without the input of the nation members, and up until this day, we feel that, there should have been a referendum within our community so that each person within our community would have had a say on whether or not to support any kind of coal exploration. That did not happen. So another thing that we've been trying to do is we've been trying to access the IBA, the Impact Benefit Agreement between the Peigan First Nation and Riversdale Resources, Benga Mines. We have been unsuccessful. We've been told that it's a confidential document, so I like to think that that comes back to accountability and transparency from our leadership. There's lack of accountability and transparency. But anyways, that rally did arrive. We did have media scrums along Highway 3 up top, looking down on in our community. We had the MLA Shannon Phillips, the MLA from Edmonton. I think he's the critic for the energy. We also had a lot of non-nation community members that were a part of that rally. The convoy. We did go down in the river bottom. We did host a rally just with nation members, and I like to think that at the end of the day, all the excitement that was happening on that particular day, it helped our cause and everybody's cause, because it elevated the whole notion of no to coal on the eastern slopes, because it was recorded all over the news that day. All you had to do is turn on the TV and you'd see it on the 6 o'clock news. So anyways, the very next week, I received a call that the Joint Review Panel had come down with their decision. Very, very exciting. We were so excited within our community. But I guess the thing is that whenever there's a decision that is made, by a Joint Review Panel, I always had in the back of my mind that, there's an appeal. Someone's going to appeal. We expected that. So when we heard that Benga Mines had appealed, it wasn't really too much of a surprise to us. But what really caught us off guard was when we found out that our own leadership had filed an appeal as well. It was very, very, very disheartening, for our nation members, knowing that our leadership had filed an appeal. And if you go ask any of the majority of our nation members, we do not support, what our leadership has done, in filing that appeal. And we've been very vocal. We've been very verbal. We did write a letter on July 28th to our leadership, letting them know that we weren't happy about it. There was no consultation with us. We did not support their decision for an appeal. And we CC'd it to the Canada, the Canadian government, as well as the Alberta government. We also wrote a letter to Benga Mines on September 1st, John Wallington, the Chief Executive Officer of Benga Mines, letting him know that we do not support, his motion to appeal as well. So we have been very vocal, and we've been we've every time we've had the opportunity to be on media, you know, through Lethbridge or Calgary or whatever, we've been very, very steadfast in letting letting it know through the media that we have been adamantly opposed, and we don't support those appeals that have been moving forward. So anyways, we also did write a letter regarding Tent Mountain, and we were very, very happy that it got pushed to a federal environmental impact assessment, because that's what needed to happen. What that means is that grassroots Indigenous community members will be able to have some kind of say whether or not what happens with that Tent Mountain, you know. And there were some things that were going on behind the scenes with our leadership in Tent Mountain that we had to kind of railroad off the railroad track. But there was some conversation that there was a memorandum of understanding that was being negotiated between our leadership and Tent Mountain. But we did everything we did to railroad that. And at the end of the day, we weren't very popular, you know, with our leadership, but this is not a popularity thing. This is what is doing in the best interest of the environment. So we had to do what we needed to do. On September 7th, we did meet with the Coal Policy Committee. So I'm just going to share maybe about 2 or 3 important slides from that PowerPoint presentation. So just let me share a screen here, okay? So that you can all see. Right at the outset, even before we started our presentation to the Coal Policy, the Coal Policy Committee, we put out a disclaimer right at the beginning, okay? And what we said is, we do not want today's engagement with the Alberta government's Coal Policy Committee interpreted or misunderstood that Mountain Child Valley Society supports coal exploration on the eastern slopes of the Rocky Mountains, as we are adamantly opposed to coal mining in Alberta. Consultation is not consent. And we felt that we needed to do this because, you know what, when you're talking to, any kind of government, you know, they have their own interpretation of what is consultation and what is, and what is consent. And, so we didn't want to make it look like just because we were going to meet with the coal policy that we were endorsing coal exploration on the eastern slopes. So we put this disclaimer out right at the outset. But we did talk about a little bit of the coal policy. So just hold on for a sec here. Okay. Okay, here we go. Alberta government policy. This was another screen we shared. Our presentation today is to be inclusive not only for the coal policy, but rather for all future Alberta government policy. If the government is truly committed to reconciliation with the Indigenous people, making significant changes with how government engages and develops policy with Indigenous people will only result in a sustainable economy that will be a benefit for all Albertans. The 1976 coal policy. Although it was meant that the 1976 coal policy protect the eastern slopes of the Rocky Mountains, the document fails to mention anything pertaining to the Indigenous people of Turtle Island and how the First Peoples will be impacted. It has become apparent that the policy was developed without meaningful engagement with the Indigenous people in Alberta. The Crown has a duty to consult with the Indigenous people to ensure the policy truly reflects all Albertans. Without Indigenous concerns and issues incorporated into the document, the policy will not be complete. So I don't know, I'm sure that a lot of you have looked at that 1976 coal policy. There's nothing in there about Indigenous, absolutely nothing. And that's a travesty, you know, and I know that it was done in 1976 under the former premier, the late Peter Lougheed, but it's a travesty that there was no consultation that was done with the Indigenous people and their thoughts and things were put into that. There's absolutely nothing in there. Concerns with the 1976 coal policy, preface, page 1, lists 4 parts to the policy document when in fact should have a 5th part that addresses the implications to the First Peoples. Issues that need to be referenced in this section are the Charter of Rights to the First Peoples, Number 2, Section 35 of the Canadian Constitution that recognizes the Aboriginal and treaty rights of the Aboriginal people in Canada. 3, inherent rights. 4, treaty relationships to the Crown. 5, implications to the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, UNDRIP. And we kind of went along and talked about certain sections of the coal policy, elements to the policy, need to add implications to the First Peoples engagement. We talked about the geographical description of Alberta. There was no mention that, of the First Nations in Alberta and our ancestral lands, let alone the Métis settlements in Northern Alberta. We talked about consultation. What is consultation? How do we define consultation? Compatibility with other land uses, land surface reclamation, town sites and infrastructure. We did a very, very good presentation to the coal panel. Acquisition of exploration and rights. Alberta Indigenous tourism, that's very, very important. How is coal exploration going to impact Alberta Indigenous tourism? It's a multi-million-dollar business that contributes to the Alberta economy. In the policy, there's no mention of how the policy will impact Indigenous tourism and how government plans to address this gap to maintain and improve Indigenous tourism in Alberta. We, the Indigenous people, need to be a meaningful partner with the Alberta government. With the potential of the desecration of the eastern slopes and selenium waste in our water streams will no doubt impact tourism in Alberta. And we talked about user fees, that's a very, very important one. At the 1976 coal policy, it references under the Mines and Minerals Acts, royalties that are payable at the discretion of the Crown, in addition to the government and the leasee being a recipient of the royalties. The policy must take into consideration a user fee for the Indigenous communities that will be impacted in the surrounding area of the ancestral lands. A formula needs to be developed that determines the life of the royalties to be paid to the Indigenous communities for the duration of the said application for environmental development. So anyways, we kind of talked about, quite a few things, in our PowerPoint presentation. And basically what we did is we like to think that we indigenized that coal policy. That's what we did. Whether or not the coal policy takes any of our recommendations forward, or we don't have a clue what's going to come out in that when that report is tabled, in November. But we did do our due diligence and go meet with the coal policy. I just want to quickly share too that I've had some discussion with a couple of our elected leaders at home. And they're kind of the opinion that, and these are their words coming out of their mouth, that Grassy Mountain and coal mining on the eastern slopes of the Rocky Mountains is on life support. That's what it is. With the decision coming down from the JBR, with the decision coming down from the former, from Jonathan Wilkinson, and everything kind of going in our favor, they're feeling that even though they have filed an appeal, the whole notion of coal exploration is on life support. So I guess to me, that's a good sign. And a couple of things that we're kind of watching out for in Peigan is the results of the federal election on Friday, because we see that, that's very, very important. That's going to affect not only the Indigenous people in Alberta, but the whole notion of coal exploration on the eastern slopes, because we know a couple of days before the writ was dropped by Justin Trudeau that his Minister of Environment and Climate Change, Jonathan Wilkinson, made a public statement that the government of Canada was not going to, support any kind of coal exploration, on the eastern slopes. So basically, they were backing up the decision of the JBR. But our fears there are that, should the results of the federal election on Monday, where, we're looking at a conservative government in Canada, we're worried that, that decision that the former environment minister is going to be overturned, so, those are our fears. And we're also going to be watching out for the results of the appeals that are going forward in the Alberta Court of Appeal and and I guess they're not going to happen until December. So we'll kind of be watching out for that. But in the meantime, we're going to continue to work hard. We're going to continue to be the voice of what we need to protect, within our ancestral territory. So having said that, thank you for your time, and I'll turn it back over to you, Ian.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Adam. We are now ready for questions that people would like to pose to the panel. I'm going to start us off. So Laura's already sort of chipped in on this. It's again, for me, one of the striking things about this debate is the idea that conservative politicians seem to be ignoring the sentiment of people who live in the heartland. I mean, who live in, you're part of like core conservative constituencies. I mean, I might joke that I think some ranchers in southern Alberta come out of the grave to vote conservative. I mean, that's how people are just going to put aside and vote and come back into the UCP fold and vote conservative because of other reasons, that it's not that important an issue to them.
I'll just chip in there. The sentiment that I've heard come from many people is that federal politicians don't want to talk about it, especially federal politicians on the conservative side. They won't answer any questions about whether or not they think it should be one way or the other. I could not get my MP to make a statement one way or the other. They're all sort of sitting the fence and pretending that it's not their issue. It's a provincial issue. It's a provincial issue. And even when you bring up and say to them, well, Wilkinson stepped in, it's now got to go to federal review. What do you think about that? They just deflect and they don't want to talk about it at all. So I actually don't think that they think it's as big an issue as we think it is.
Bruce, you were nodding your head when Laura was speaking. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I'd love to elaborate on it. Mainly, I was just nodding my head because I was agreeing so much with Laura, who billed herself as a non-intellectual power, and she really is. So I don't know. I'm just getting the feeling that they all just want it to go away. I think the federal conservatives, they our MP here in Foothills has been on record that he supports Grassy Mountain. He's been fairly silent since the decisions around Grassy Mountain. He also has said that he supports balanced development of mines. The balance there's that balance thing, the one that we don't think there is a balance. And Ian, I wish I had a great answer for you on the question that you asked me to think about, which is, what's in it for these politicians? And I wish I knew. Like I can't. I guess I'm a politician, but I'm a politician from the purest form of democracy, which is non-party politics, municipal council, and I just don't get the other kind. Like I've never wanted to really get it. I've covered it. I've written about it, and I've tried to understand it. I can't imagine running for an office that you're not free to say what you truly believe, and vote, the way that you truly believe. I just can't. I just don't get it. We can think about all kinds of motives that they might have, that the UCP politicians who supported this, the motives, we can think of some really nefarious motives that I think will probably come out at some point, but I'm not going to repeat them here. We've all had these thoughts, as to what's in it for them, possibly individually, personally. We've all had these thoughts. I'd be just speculating and getting us in trouble by voicing them. I just don't get it. I just don't begin to get it, Ian. So,
Right. Adam, Nigel?
You know what? When we went and met with the coal policy committee, I like to think that the coal policy committee was listening and being very, in tune to the presentation that we did make for them. But at the end of the day, they were appointed for one task, and that was to go out and consult Albertans on a new modern style of policy, right? That was basically their mandate. And I know that a lot of parties that have gone before the coal policy committee have basically told them what we did, is that we're adamantly opposed to any kind of coal exploration. So I like to think that, that they took it to heart, but at the end of the day, I'm kind of a little naive, and I'm a little bit of a pessimistic that I don't think that's actually going to be reflected when that final report comes out in November. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Adam. Nigel?
So I guess responding to the general question of why we see particularly the UCP continuing to commit to coal and to carbon generally, I think that maybe three things. One, a real belief that an amazing continuing belief that carbon still has a future. So kind of a blinkered approach to where the rest of the world is going, and so that's issue number one. I think second, wanting to send a continuing message that Alberta is open to investment, right? So don't change the rules, don't prejudice interests that have already invested. Again, very short-term political thinking. And then I think the third thing, and this, I think, you can make this as a general statement about the way the Kenney government makes decisions. They're constantly asking themselves, will this decision, whatever this decision is, split the right-wing vote? And if it does, they will be exceptionally reluctant to make it. And I think we've seen this play out on COVID, and I think we see it play out on coal. I mean, clearly a decision to say no to any coal mining on the eastern slopes is going, I mean, Laura said the issue is in crosses party political boundaries. It certainly does, but it would split the right-wing vote way more than that of other political parties, I think. So to me, that's actually a great touchstone for trying to explain UCP or Kenney-led UCP decision-making across a whole range of issues.
Yeah, and which might speak to Laura's point in the chat too, Nigel, about the ideological nature of the position, that there's a fear that it's going to alienate and split that right-wing vote, and therefore we don't, we're not going to do that. Nigel, could I ask you a question about the applications coming up? What about the applications for permission to appeal that are before the Alberta Court of Appeal? Can you give us any sort of insight into what we've seen? I mean, how unusual this is, and what you think the chances are of Benga winning, getting that judge to give them permission to appeal?
Sure, I can try and do that. And I see the questions come in part from Carolyn. So hi there, Carolyn. So I guess the first thing to note is this is a two-stage approach. So Benga, first of all, has to cross this threshold of getting permission to appeal. And then if it gets permission to appeal, then there'll be another hearing on the merits of its claims. And the first thing it's got to do is to establish that it's got what the lawyers call, and this is where it gets, I'm going to get into some jargon here, I'm afraid. Is there a clear point of law or jurisdiction? And so to explain that a bit, if the panel had denied Benga the opportunity to make its case, prevented it from introducing certain evidence, then that would be a breach of natural justice, a clear error of law, and you could expect a court to intervene. But when you look at what Benga is actually saying here, they're saying things like fail to properly consider Alberta government policy as reflected in the South Saskatchewan Regional Plan, ignored or misconstrued evidence in relation to West Slope cutthroat trout. And all of those issues look to me not as pure questions of law, but rather attempts to question simply the conclusions that the panel reached because they don't like those conclusions. So, and to the extent that I'm right about that characterization, then I think you could easily see the Benga's application for permission rejected at that first hurdle. They also have one claim, which is a claim in relation to the failure of the panel to consult in relation to its rejection decision. And you could say maybe that is a point of law, it's a point of constitutional law, but I don't think it lies in Benga's mouth to make that claim. I mean, maybe it's a claim that the Stoney Nakoda First Nation can make. Maybe it's a claim that the Peigan can make. But and of course, the consultation that's being referenced is consultation in respect of the implications of rejection for the impact and benefit agreements that Adam referenced. But I mean, clearly there was consultation during this process. But so I'd say, I guess to cut to the chase, I would rate Benga's chances of getting permission as being low.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Nigel. Adam, I mean, one of the things that I think is striking about your presentation and your discussion of your involvement is consultation, and the fact that I mean, you and I share a belief that neither of us were consulted by our relevant leadership on these sorts of issues. Have you looked at the Peigan brief on consultation? I'm curious what you think about the argument that they may be trying to make in their application for permission, that there was insufficient consultation with the Peigan from the Joint Review Panel.
You know what, Ian, that's a very good question. And you know what, the whole thing with consultation within our community, you know what, it's a much bigger picture. It's a much bigger picture than just the consultation. And you know, and I know that you know, we've been really raising the issue of the whole notion of the Indian Act being a paternalistic you know, policy that governs the First Nations, you know, across Canada. And you know, the leadership, you know, that we have in our community and all communities across Canada are Indian Act chief and councils, So the thing is that, something needs to be done, something needs to change, but that's the big picture, that's a huge, huge picture, eh? And, within Piikani First Nation, we do have our own consultation, policy within our community. And in that policy, it says that, a vast number of our membership, must be, meaningfully consulted when there's a magnitude of a huge project such as Grassy that's going to impact our community. And that did not happen. That did not happen, as well as the whole notion of when it comes to making a decision, you know what I mean? So those are things that did not happen. And those are some of our arguments that we're putting forward.
Mhm. Maybe this is mainly to Nigel, but I'd like to hear what others would think about it. And Nigel, what I'm curious about is so there was a story in the media today about the conservatives, of federal conservatives, and what, if anything, are they saying about coal? And the conclusion of the piece seemed to be that they're not saying much about it, what they would do about it if they formed a government. Are the actions and the statements that Minister Wilkinson has made, whether it's on thermal coal or metallurgical coal, are those statements ones that could they change those decisions just through ministerial order without having to go to the House for a vote on something like that?
Oh, I think I got most of that question. You were cutting out a bit there again, Ian.
Yeah,
but
sorry.
I think the question is, could a different government change its mind on all of these commitments that Wilkinson has just made? And the answer is clearly they could. So the thermal policy statement is simply a policy statement. There's no legislative basis for it. You could say there's some legislative base now for the net zero overall policy, because that's now enshrined in federal legislation. And similarly, the commitment to designate all future coal projects, that's simply a decision that will be made on a case-by-case basis as every project comes forward. So Wilkinson is saying, if I'm in the chair, this is the decision I intend to make. He's not absolutely guaranteeing he'll make it, because I think he'd be in offside if he did that. But I guess there's a rule that you can't sort of prejudice or fetter the discretion that you need to exercise on a case-by-case basis. But clearly, if we had a minister of a different political stripe who was less, or was much more worried about interfering in provincial resource development, we could see no designation decisions being made. And I guess what we do know about the federal Conservatives is they don't like the Impact Assessment Act. They voted against the new Impact Assessment Act, and their history is a history of not intervening in provincial resource development policies.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Nigel. Well, we're just past 8 o'clock at this point. At this point in time, and I think that I would just like to thank, on behalf of everyone who's attended this evening, thank our 4 panelists for their insights and for taking the time out this evening to share those insights with us. I think that you have, as I said at the outset, I think you have been so vital in terms of informing any number of constituencies about this issue. And I think that the prospects of the modern coal policy being a no coal policy have only been increased by the work that you've all done on this file. So I just want to thank you, and I'm sure I'm speaking on behalf of everyone who's attended this evening, for your efforts in that respect. So thank you all. The one thing I would like to do by way of closing, two things. One, there is that link to the petition that Laura is putting forward. So if you want to go to the chat, check that out, get that link, send that in. And the second thing I would invite you to do, and AWA members and supporters will be probably tired of me saying this to you, but the deadline for the Coal Policy Committee submissions is Monday, or Monday, is it Monday? The 19th, September the 19th is the deadline that I was told anyways by the Coal Policy Committee in terms of making submissions. So if you haven't, if you're so inclined, please, I should have the link that I could give you right now, but I don't. So, Google Coal Policy Committee Alberta, go to their webpage, email them and tell them what you think about this madness that some would like to inflict on these special places. So anyways, thank you everyone for being here this evening. Again, to Nigel, Laura, Adam, Bruce, thank you so much for your time, and really appreciate it. So good night, everyone.